job. So what Russia have been doing so far mostly is something called denial of service, where they try and attack a company's main website or their infrastructure and knock it offline for a period of time. And that kind of uses thousands of computers all pooling their computing power together, point at one place, and then it can't kind of take that much power and it falls over. But it's a bit like a torch. You shine that in someone's light, it blinds them for a second, you move it away, and then they recover. And that's kind of how those work. But they're moving on to kind of more advanced type cyber attacks where they try to get onto companies' computer networks. Now, what they can do from there is they can obviously steal data, perhaps something confidential or sensitive that might be useful to them. But they can also install ransomware or do what's called a wiper attack, where they try and delete all the data installed in those systems to basically cripple that company and knock it offline, perhaps permanently or perhaps for a period of time. Now, so far, these attacks have been concentrated on Ukraine. But as you said, President Biden has announced there's been some intelligence pointing towards Russia expanding that out to the West, particularly the US, but also I would imagine that Europe would get targeted as well. And we have a lot of potentially vulnerable targets, as you can imagine.
Yeah. Well, tell me about where we're at in that timeline here. Do you envision that the networks in the US and the EU are already compromised?
No, I don't think we're there yet. And just to stress, those networks are generally quite well defended compared to kind of normal companies, normal businesses. So I don't think we're there yet. I don't think they would be compromised, but they will be a target. And that means that we've got to be ready for them, really. And now, hopefully, businesses have been listening to what everyone's been saying and getting themselves ready by putting defenses in place, antivirus, firewalls, all that normal stuff, but also making sure their systems are patched up to date and they've got detection systems in place, etc. But there's probably a storm coming, that we can see rumblings of it. We can see the Russians prepping for it. And what they do normally is they kind of do this mass scan of the internet. So they'll be looking at every US company, probing for vulnerabilities, looking at those companies that haven't put those defenses in place, the ones that are just trying to rely on their old technology and their old security and haven't upgraded recently.
Is there any concern of smaller businesses that don't necessarily have the finances to sort of gear up and protect themselves getting targeted, and with that, consumer information getting targeted? Or are we going to continue to see what we've seen previously from Russia, which is more targeting, critical infrastructure, or like an Amazon Web Services, a little bit more of a bigger giant there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those smaller companies will probably end up being collateral damage. So obviously Russia would be interested in those big targets, those kind of high ticket items like the critical national infrastructure. But if you're a small company and you've left yourself undefended, the Russian hackers can send out like a mass attack that will target various vulnerable interfaces or systems that will allow them to get into those small companies as well. So, they want to cause disruption. That's going to be one of their targets. So if you can cause mass disruption to small businesses, then absolutely that can be a problem. But businesses don't have to spend a huge amount of money. Cybersecurity doesn't have to be that complicated. So there are things they can do, even as a small business with a small budget, to help defend against it.
Tell me about that. What can they do now to prevent this?
Yeah, okay. So basic things like making sure they have nice long passwords. It sounds silly, but making sure you've got a password of 14 characters or more, and it's not something very, very common. You're not doing sort of "this is my password." It's something a bit random. I normally say to use a sentence, something along those lines. So when I give training to companies, I always say something like "I love green tomatoes," something a bit random that you can remember, and you make your staff all use these nice long passwords. You combine that with antivirus software, but what we call EDR, which is like the next generation antivirus software that's better at defending against ransomware, and then you make sure all your systems are patched up to date. It's the sort of thing when you see your Windows system asking for updates and things like that, it's making sure you actually do those, and same with your mobile phone and stuff. And finally, the one that makes the most difference, generally speaking, is some sort of detection system in place that's able to see when a hacker has got onto your network and isolate them and basically kill their connection where it is. So those simple steps, and they don't, like I said, they don't cost much money. The last one to add on, is to use multi-factor authentication. That's where you get that separate text message code through to your phone, and that's a brilliant deterrent, even against advanced attacks like would come from Russia.
Such a good explanation, Rob. Thank you for that. You mentioned making sure that our phones are up to date, our systems are up to date. Do we need to worry about making sure that, our personal iPhones are protected right now as well? Or is this more, again, of a corporate, bigger fish issue?
It's a bit of both. So yes, the hackers would potentially target the businesses directly and try and hack through the VPNs and things that are used by that company on the internet. But also, how most companies are hacked is through the people that work there. Someone does something, so they click on a link, open an attachment, or they're running something out of date that allows the hackers to get in. So yes, we should focus as people who work for companies and our own personal life, we should focus on that stuff as well. So it's making sure, that you keep your phone up to date. It doesn't mean you have to buy the latest iPhone or Android. It means just installing the latest software updates. It's prompting you for, and also just making sure that we are aware of things we're clicking on, like we should do normally anyway, but looking out for dodgy looking links and things that obviously hacking attempts, and we've seen some pretty crude stuff over the years, but the Russians may be doing some more advanced stuff in the next few months, I imagine.
Got it. Okay, thank you for explaining that. I do want to circle back to the question on critical infrastructure getting targeted. This is the idea that, our water or gas pipelines or telecommunications could be targeted in the U.S., impacting our water supply, our cell phones, our gas. Rob, how concerned are you about that, especially when we look back at the SolarWinds cyber attack in 2020, which caused a lot of issues here in the U.S. and lost companies billions of dollars?
Yeah, I mean, that attack was very, very advanced. It required hacking into SolarWinds and then deploying software across all of their clients. So it would have taken a lot of planning. And at the moment, we're seeing a kind of a scattergun approach from Russia in how they attack. We haven't seen much of the national infrastructure in Ukraine being targeted by cyber attacks, probably because, to put it bluntly, it's more effective to hit it with a missile or attack it directly. But when we're talking about the US and Europe, cyber attacks are the way that Russia can fight back against sanctions without triggering a military response. So yes, I am concerned, and yes, I think national infrastructure will be targeted. However, to stress, it is quite difficult to hack some of that stuff. It is well defended. We are looking out for those hacks. We've got lots of security teams and defensive companies like mine looking after that infrastructure and trying to prevent those attacks. So I do think there will be attacks, and some of them may be successful, as we saw with the Colonial Pipeline attack last year. But I'm not hugely concerned. I don't think suddenly the whole power is going to go off in the country or water's going to be cut off or anything like that. I think that the attacks and success of those attacks will be isolated. We'll learn from those and we'll upgrade. So yeah, I'm concerned, but I'm not terrified. It's probably the right way of putting it.
Okay, good. I love to hear that when we're covering this, Rob. Thank you for that. I want to end on, you mentioned that you're on the defensive. I wonder to what extent any, ethical hackers like yourself in the U.S. are going on the offensive here. Can you tell me anything about any potential strategies for counter-targeting either Russia or any companies or individual bad actors who might be planning hacks on American companies and individuals?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of activity already. So there's a group known as the IT Army of Ukraine that are fighting back against Russia. And they're not just Ukrainians. They are from all over the world. It's like a hacker collective coming together. We've seen the group Anonymous targeting Russian systems. So we've seen everyone kind of coming together to do things. One of the first things we saw when Russia invaded was a Russian ransomware group called Conti, who are very, very famous, very effective, very advanced. They were hacked and all of their sort of systems and things were released onto the internet. So it was a very first salvo back at Russia in the cyberspace. So I expect this to expand. There are lots and lots of hackers all around the world, some quite basic, others really, really advanced in their skills, who are targeting Russia, trying to expose information and also trying to get the information from the West into Russian homes to show what's going on, because of that sort of restriction on the media. We're trying to get that information to them, and we're doing that through hacking techniques, through releasing huge amounts of email addresses so people can email people, can text people, and just show them what's going on.